Ooh, live.
All right. Hello, Henrik Mattsson.
Hi. How are you?
I believe we are live. How are you? I'm good. I'm
I'm
good.
great too.
At a time when everyone's working from home and there's a crazy global pandemic, the first question I ask is, are you wearing pants? Are you just want to make sure.
Do you want proof? I am wearing pants,
No, I just
but
want to make sure.
I'm wearing sweatpants. And this is actually, I've been living in North America now for 15 years. And the biggest difference culturally between Europe and North America is that North Americans fly in sweatpants and Europeans would never do that.
Yeah.
You don't want to be caught dead in a wreckage with sweatpants. It's a thing about honor. But I have now become sufficiently integrated. So just before the lockdown, I flew in sweatpants for the first time, and now I've been wearing sweatpants ever since. So I'm all in. How about you? Are you wearing pants?
There you go. I am shorts, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So welcome back to everyone who's watching to UXR Conversations. This is episode 2. I'm Noam Siegel, Director of User Research at Wellfront. And today with us is Henrik Mattsson, CEO of Lookback.
Hi.
So we wanted to talk about remote research today, but before we jump into that, I have to bring something up, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned recently, I'm paraphrasing, that you are not a great researcher. Is that something you
You're
recall saying?
paraphrasing kindly. I'm a horribly incompetent researcher. But I just recently became aware. It was worse before because I thought I was good.
Okay. And yet when doing my research about you, I discovered you have a PhD, which means you have done some research
Yes.
in economic geography.
Yes.
So my first question to you is, did you choose geography because that's the easiest subject that people always choose when they want to just, get away with their studies easily? Is that why you chose this, or were you just...
Yes. No, actually, it's a friend of mine's father was a professor in this, and he is the most interesting person I've ever met. And I was just like, I want to do that, and that's how I got into it.
Okay. Now, I actually read a bit of your dissertation. Is that surprising to you? Has
You're a
anyone
very
else read
thorough
it?
guy.
I am.
No,
I am.
no. A couple of people that had to, they were paid to do it. So you're probably the first volunteer. Thank you. How was it?
Well, one thing really irked me. You called I think in one of your articles or something, you called science an unruly activity.
Yes.
Do you remember that? What did you mean by that?
Well, perhaps not science, but the fruits of science. When was this? This was in the early, I guess, in the early 2000s, right? And the world was a simpler place back then, and there was a lot more hope. And a lot of governments had this idea that, oh, we're going to make a lot of money out of, the biotech industry or the, IT industry. So you had those, everyone was a Silicon Valley of sorts. So there was the biotech valley. Everyone had one of those. But when you look at these technologies and how they actually, who they benefit, and how you as a region or a country where this technology is from can benefit from it as well, it's really, really hard to do that in a way that is predictable. And you probably shouldn't pour too many public funds into trying to do it. So that's what I meant by unruly there, that it's, you never really know where it's going to go.
Okay. And, I think if you just take a cursory glance, then it might be hard to understand how you got from biotech innovation and the effects of regional effects, geographical effects on that innovation to what you do today. But I felt when I thought about it that both on the personal level and the professional level, running a company that's completely remote, moving from Sweden to Montreal, Canada, I think you've experienced a lot about the effects of kind of geography, both on work and personal life. Is that fair? How have your early research experiences affected your later years?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. I more than I thought a couple of years ago. I think perhaps not my field, but just doing learning the research profession, learning the tricks of the trade, so to speak, when you do your PhD, and also working as a teacher and all of that stuff. It's really useful. It's been very useful for me throughout my career in business, where it's about understanding what's going on, what's important, what isn't important in a large set of data, and breaking problems down into their component parts and understanding how people understand things. And so I use it every day. I would say it's really perhaps not so much the geography part, but
well,
but some
if
of it.
If anyone wants a copy of Henrik's dissertation, I have it in my inbox. I will gladly send it to you. So the company you run these days is called Lookback. I want to do that literally and look back before we look forwards to where remote research began. Remote research is of absolute crucial importance right now, because we are in a situation where we are all stuck in our homes, trying to stay healthy and safe while a global pandemic makes its way around the globe. When you started at Lookback and you kind of thought about the remote research space and how it's evolved, where do you really think remote research kind of began from your standpoint?
Right.
What were the earliest examples of great remote research that you've heard of?
So I think at the very beginning, I'm sure some people did it, but if we're talking about remote moderated research, I don't think it really existed when we started. It was more about, our first mission was to kind of break free of the lab. So not having cameras hanging over you and those like FBI mirrors where no one was there, which was one of the problems, right? Because you can't get the engineers to get behind the mirror there. But so it was more about recording this stuff using your devices instead of having to put people into a lab. But it wasn't possible at that point to do, have this kind of conversation that we are having now, because the video tech just wasn't there. So I'd say perhaps 1 year in, we launched a live product. And I think it was one of the first, at least dedicated to research products out there, where you could actually have a conversation while you were recording someone's screen and seeing what they were doing there. So it's fairly recent, I would say. But it's pretty magical. I remember the first time I saw it, when we were testing this out, and I saw, we're testing it on our own product, and I saw someone moderating, and someone who knows how to moderate. I can't moderate research, but when someone really knows how to do it, it's like watching an artist, and they were researching the thing, and I was completely hooked. And I'm like, every stakeholder should have this. So, yeah.
What do you see when you see someone who's an incredible moderator? What is it you notice which indicates to you that person is an incredible moderator? Is there anything that you can articulate that kind of you notice?
I think it has something to do with they're there, and if they weren't there, the test would go somewhere completely different. But they're not influencing the test. So they're guiding without influencing, if that makes sense. And that's when I say I'm bad at it. I just can't do it. I ask leading questions, and I just completely destroy the data, because it says more about the questions I ask than about the user experience. But when you have a good moderator, a good researcher, they're there and they get the insights they need, but the insights come from the user and the experience the user had, and not from the researcher.
So you touched upon this a bit, but I'd love for you to share what you believe remote research tools like Lookback enable us to do, besides the obvious, which is to not have to be in the same space as the people we're researching. What other things has remote research enabled us to do?
Right. Well, more research. I think it all comes from this, that you kind of free it from space, right? So there are many different aspects of that. Mostly, researchers, instead of, I guess it depends on how you do it, but you can spend more time on target. You can do more research in a day if you don't have to have people come into your office and everything that happens with that. So that's one aspect. But more importantly, I think you can have your stakeholders observing also. That was a big problem that we when I had early discussions with some of our biggest customers that had huge labs and everything, they had these beautiful labs, researchers were there, all the equipment was there, the participants would come in. If the participant missed the bus, there was another one lined up. But the engineers weren't there, the designers weren't there, because they were in some other building over at some other campus. And, you couldn't hook them up on a link to this session, so they wouldn't participate. And I think that's freeing it from that space, freeing it up from the researchers' workflow, so that the people who are actually ultimately going to turn these insights into better products can also have this happen in their workflow. That's what we're trying really to do, and I think that's the true power of it. So it's more on the insights engagement side, perhaps, but yeah.
I find that interesting. I find that interesting. I mean, collaboration is such an important part of our day-to-day. Most of us work in cross-functional teams. I know most researchers want to bring collaborators into the lab with them, quote unquote. Do you have data that indicate that the engagement with research is higher with remote research rather than in-person, kind of typical, an 80s style focus group lab somewhere in the middle of nowhere in a suburb of Chicago?
I don't have hard data on that, because we don't measure who's there next to the person. But I mean, one of the things that we started building a couple of years ago, and that we now have also for the in-person mode, so you can actually remotely, even if the research is done in person between a participant and the researcher, all the stakeholders can still be in the virtual observation room and join in from anywhere, right? So, and this is something that we've seen. There's a tremendous engagement, and it's just rising and rising. And once you've had an engineer in the room, they keep coming back. So we see a lot of engagement, especially now with the pandemic. One of the big drivers have been the stakeholder engagement. So the remote, not only the research is going remote, but the engagement is going remote as well. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think some of the most excited faces I've seen during research sessions are engineers who join and they suddenly run out of the room, bring a bunch of Post-its and start throwing Post-its at you, begging you to ask questions they're very, very curious about. So there's no doubt that's really important. What do you feel like the current limitations of remote research tools are? And to the extent you can share, what do you feel like Lookback specifically is focusing on right now to address those limitations?
Right.
Or kind of innovate on those limitations that we have?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's been an interesting journey, actually, and we've been trying to address one bucket of problems at a time. The biggest limitation used to be the actually capturing the test and having that done remotely by a participant who's able to actually download whatever they need to download and get through the flow without assistance, and do that quickly enough for actually the research session to not be over by the time the session starts. But that's fairly easy to do. There are still some limitations there, and that's always going to be a problem, I think, with you want participants who are not tech savvy and who haven't done this 100 times, and then you're going to run into the issues of the usability. Secondly, I think the reliability is really tough. This session has been going on now without. I hope everyone can still see it, though. But video is hard. Even it's really tricky to do. So that's where we spent the last 2 years, and now we're very happy about that. Now I think the engagement part is the last. I wouldn't say it's the last. That would be jinxing it. But it's the next big frontier for us, is to make it even easier to get engagement and to get engineers in the room. I keep talking about engineers, obviously not the only stakeholders who need to see research, but so what tools do they use? How can you integrate this? How can you get them into the live session when it happens? Because the researcher can't keep track of everyone who's interested in something, and the people who need to see it can't keep track of all the research that's happening. So how can you make that easy with Slack integrations and stuff like that? So I'd say that's the next one. Yeah.
And can you define exactly what you mean by engagement? And also, are there different types of engagement for different types of roles? Can you kind of unpack that a bit more?
Well, I mean, showing up to a meeting or looking at sitting in a meeting and listening to a PowerPoint presentation isn't necessarily engagement. So engagement for me is when something happens. At Lookback, we talk about the I don't know if that's a term that makes sense in English, but the empathic bond that you create. This thing that you talked about also, where once you've seen a real user use the thing that you built in a real context, you're hooked, and you come back for more, and you create really nice relationships. I love to see that dynamic even in our team between our researchers and our engineers. Once it keeps going, it's just people just want more. So that's one set of engagement with the user experience. But another set of engagement is also that it goes both ways, right? I mean, the researcher also needs to be engaged in making sure that they provide stuff that they understand what their stakeholders need, and that can be really tricky because it's a broad group of stakeholders. So how do you get that dialogue going? I mean, it's usually when people are in the session and the research is good, then you get engagement from most people. Most people who build products are interested in building nice products. They're creative people. They want to see what's happening out there in the world. So that's usually not the problem, but it's everything around it. Research can sometimes be a little bit on the outside, and that's because of a lack of engagement both ways sometimes. I don't know if that was an unpacking, but that was a good rant about engagement anyway.
Yeah.
I think.
And so in 5 years, let's say, in that kind of time span, what do you think remote research looks like, or how would it be different than what we have now, given all of the tools in the space? Can you envision what would be fundamentally different, if anything?
Well, I think we've only people will do it. That's most people don't do it now, and we don't research at the scale that we should research, and a lot of that is because it's not integrated in the workflows also. So I think remote will truly integrate research into the product workflows, the product teams, and that's what I think is probably the main thing. Then who knows? Perhaps we don't even have screens in 5 years. 5 years is a long time in technology.
One thing I think about a lot in this context is that some people may claim that a limitation of remote research is that if the context really matters, then you have no choice but to be in that context. If the place where the user is matters, then remote research is not a good enough solution. So, for example, if we take Airbnb as an example, which is a product that has an online and an offline component, and the offline component is maybe a lot more important than the online one. There are things that Airbnb users do, such as check in to a home. And that happens in real life, in a very specific context, in talk about geography, almost all countries around the world. And in very different ways. Check-in looks very different in Thailand than it does in the US. And so do you think that given, I don't know, potential new developments in remote research technology, we can get over that? Will there be an answer to that hurdle of remote research not being able to really fit into the context where these actions are happening? Does that make sense?
Yes. I mean, I think there will always be a place for in-person. When I started to go back to the research, my research career, it was a lot about geography. And back when I started, people thought that, why do we even have offices? And this was in, late 90s. People were like, people are just going to work from home. Internet is just going to make everyone work from home. I think what we're living right now is an example of what that would look like, and our technology is much better than what it was 20 years ago, when people had these dreams of everyone just being in front of their computer all the time. I think there's something human that we can't really see. And we say sometimes at Lookback that it's going to be a long time before computers can understand why humans don't understand computers. I think you need to have that that, you know, computers are great, but they can't do all of this stuff. And I don't think that in-person research is going to go away. I think it's going to also grow, possibly, or I hope it will. But I think that remote research is going to outgrow in-person research by quite a lot, because it's just so much easier to do. And even if you don't get all the detail, it's much better than not doing research at all.
Yeah.
So,
we have a viewer question. I want to take a pause here. And
sure.
By the way, I encourage anyone watching to ask us questions. So let me share it on the screen here. Tiana is asking, this pandemic has disrupted people's life and work. However, people see it as both challenges and opportunities. Are there any new opportunities you are noticing happening now? So you, Henrik, essentially have a view into the research community and trends in what's happening. And I think you probably get a lot of feedback from researchers and comments. What do you think either a challenge or an opportunity in this situation is for our research community?
Yeah. So one thing I've noticed is that researchers are, not everywhere, but something I'm seeing is that researchers are now being put on the front lines, because what we're having is a rapidly developing situation. A lot of the things that we took for granted are just up in the air, and we don't know how this is going to land, right? And I see a lot of companies putting researchers, ramping up research because they have no idea what they're going to do. So they turn to the researchers. So it's definitely a time for research to deliver the promise of research. So I think that's a big opportunity for the community. And I also think that because research, I do believe that remote research, at least when it comes to the engagement with research, which is often video, it's often better done remote, and it fits better into the workflows like that. And I think a lot of people that were skeptical about that will have learned that now. I think our relationship to video as a collaboration tool will never be the same again after this. I mean, there are so many people now that have never even been in a Zoom call before this, and now they're in a Zoom call all the time, and that's going to affect them moving forward, and that's going to benefit research too, I think. So yeah, those are two, I think.
Thank you. And thank you, Tiana, for the question. I would add that one of the advantages or opportunities in a difficult situation like this, and it is difficult for many people, is that it's an opportunity to reevaluate a lot of our work and what we do and our processes and our tools. We don't often get much time to do that. And I found that, sitting at home, thinking about things, it's a time of reflection. And I think that's a good outcome, hopefully, from this crazy situation we're all in.
Yeah, and also we're all in it. I can't think of something in my lifetime, at least, where we've lived something like this as a global community. And I think that's an opportunity for. There's been a lot of pushback against tech, obviously, and for good reasons over the last couple of years. But I mean, the promise of tech also is to enable us to share and live these experiences together. And we're still learning how to do this. Before, the world was very, people lived in their own little worlds, and now it's all connected, and that's pretty amazing. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in that, even if I can't really specify how that will materialize. But I think it's a good thing not that this pandemic is a good thing, but this experience that we're having now definitely brings opportunity for humanity, I think.
Yeah. So can you explain, within the space of remote research tools, where is it that Lookback sits precisely? Kind of the main use cases, how it maybe compares to other tools. Where within that space is Lookback current?
So I think the best way to describe us is that we are very specialized, and what we do really well is provide you with a platform for remote moderated. I mean, we do we allow you to do other things too, but that's where we're really strong, and we're very focused on that. If you need more of a broad fire and forget research, where like I want to set up these studies, and there are probably better alternatives. But if you want a platform for this, I would say this is where we're strong. and we're also, I think, one of the only ones with our own video tech who do this specifically for UX research. Obviously, there are a lot of great video platforms out there, Zoom being one, and you can use that for research too, but there are a lot of limitations because it's not built for it. So if you want a lean, nice, reliable platform for moderated remote, try out Lookback. It's free, 14 days. If you don't like it, don't pay me. Is that a good pitch? There you go.
And you see a lot of this type of research happen. Do you have any tips or tricks for us researchers as to what has worked best? I mean, essentially, pretty much everyone now is only doing remote research. And again, we've had to completely reevaluate our processes and figure out how to do it best. What's the one thing you typically choose to tell researchers that they should or should not do when conducting remote research? Any good tips?
Oh, have a good internet connection. That's my, on the research side, talk to a researcher. I think I'm going to pass that back to you because we've already established that I'm a horrible researcher, but you're a very skilled researcher. What do you think is the best thing to do?
So, well, I agree with the internet connection bit, but I would suggest that building rapport is crucial for any research interview. And it is somewhat more difficult to do in a remote interview than an in-person one. So I would really focus and maybe, increase the time you spend on building rapport, or introduce more techniques for building rapport than you would typically do in an in-person session. We can compare this, ironically, because no one's flying right now, but we could compare this to how food on an airplane is saltier because of how our taste buds are different in high altitude and different air pressures. So kind of if you compare that to remote research, it does have some limitations, one of them being the difficulty to connect to some extent. And so my big tip would be focus on building that rapport, on making the other person feel comfortable, maybe forgetting a bit about the situation that we're in. It's easier to do that, I think, still to this day when you're in the same room. I do believe that might change. Talk about evolution and technology when we potentially move to kind of virtual spaces or augmented spaces where it feels a bit more like we're in the same room. Whereas now it's clear that you and I are not in the same room at all. So that would be my answer. We have another question from Jamie. I'm going to bring it up here. On the agency side, it feels as if they are more interested in integrating research into their offerings. Do you have any advice as to how to sell the value behind research for the end client? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, that's the $1 million question, literally. How to sell it? I think that there are two ways of thinking about this. I'm not sure you can sell it better than the obvious ones, which is, there are a lot of people building very great software out there, and people right now can distinguish between bad software and good software, and they're not going to be very patient with bad software. So if you don't do research, you're just gonna, your product is not gonna have success, and you'll find out 2 months too late. If you do research, you'll have a chance to actually build something that makes sense. Otherwise, it's mostly luck. But I think the second part is show it. There's been this narrative out there that people are not interested in research. Engineers are not interested in research, and designers are not interested in research. But I haven't met an engineer or a designer that isn't interested in the experience of observing good user research. I mean, they are interested in how this stuff is being used, how the stuff that they've built is being used. They are interested, but perhaps they're not interested in a report, a 20-page report on like 15 people failed to do this, So I think that there's that kind of, if you really want to convince people, show them, give them some highlights, just get them into one session. They're going to be hooked.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you, Jamie, for the question. I have been very occupied with something which I will be speaking about soon at UXR Conf Anywhere.
Right.
Previously UXR Conf Toronto and now Anywhere. Shout out to the UXR Conf team for making incredible changes to that conference, and Lookback is the title sponsor as well. So thank you,
Yes.
Lookback and Henrik, for that. So the talk I'm going to give there is partially about belonging and who belongs in the profession of UX research. At Lookback, you work and partner with many research teams. I'm sure you've met your share of researchers.
Yeah.
Who belongs in our profession? Who belongs in the profession of UX research? Do you have a take on that?
Well, I mean, I think we should be careful to. A lot of people, especially when you're young and you're or you're shifting careers or something, we're so concerned with, do I belong here? I mean, if you feel like you belong there, you belong there. I think that's the number one thing. I mean, I still struggle with stuff like that. Do I belong here? Like sometimes I'm like, oh my god, I shouldn't be running a company. Like this is crazy. I'm not the right person for this. But so first of all, if you feel like you belong, I mean, you probably belong. But I think there are a couple of characteristics that I've seen that good researchers have. Curiosity, obviously, that's a very important thing. You need to be you need to be hungry, and secondly, you need to be a good communicator. I think both in the or at least I wouldn't say that you have to be this from the beginning, but skills that I would work on and like constantly develop if I went into the research field would be communication, because at the end of the day, the insights that you have gathered and the research that you have done, it's just going to go die in some Dropbox somewhere if you don't get this engagement from the stakeholders, and the people who are building the product don't really get in there. And I feel that is where some people can. I think it can be very tough for researchers. And I met a lot of researchers who just had experiences of being on the outside of product teams, and it's almost kind of, they're so used to it that it's a constant fight and it's not fun anymore. It's just like you just have to drag people into the meeting and show them what the research shows, and no one wants to do this. But I'd encourage researchers to see these stakeholders as your users, and I've talked about this before at the UX conference in Toronto, for example, where you have the skill set in you. If you can figure out why a user of a product is getting confused or not seeing the value or something, you can figure out why an engineer is not interested in your report, and you can change that. You have it all in you, so you belong at the table, but the seat is not going to be given to you. Use your skills and figure it out iteratively, something like that.
I love that. I think there are at least 2 points there that really resonated with me. The first is that I think, tragically, honestly, many junior researchers, when they ask about advancing in their research career, or getting into it in the first place, the focus is very much on kind of, I don't like the term, but hard skills or tools or how to build a portfolio, rather than communication, which is a huge piece of what we do as researchers. So I just want to restate what you said, which is it's so important. And then the second thing is, which I'm interpreting, but tell me if I'm getting it wrong here, is that you can and should do internal research within your organization to get better and understand the needs of your stakeholders and your collaborators and deliver better research for everyone. And if you do that, rather than focusing solely on researching the users, which is, of course, of crucial importance, that can lead to great success. So spend some time understanding the people in your team, the engineers, the designers, PMs, everyone. So yeah, I love that. we are basically at planned time for this conversation. I wanted to ask you just how can people reach you for any questions or try out Lookback or anything else you want to share before we end?
Sure. Yeah, I think you the latest innovation in your, what do you call this, a video cast? Is that
yeah, let's go to video cast. Yeah, sure.
It's a video. That's it now. Trademarked. You put some links in the YouTube.
On YouTube. Yeah.
So my Twitter handle is there. DMs are open. I love talking about this stuff. Happy to help if I can. And yeah, happy researching.
You are pretty good on the Twitter. We have some fun on Twitter, you and I.
Yes.
I'm not sure your follower count is as high as it should be. I'm not sure people are appreciating your wisdom and wit.
Oh, you're a 10x follower.
Well, thank you. So listen, thank you so much for coming on UXR Conversations. Really appreciate it. It's good to see you as always. And we will continue these discussions offline. If anyone who's watching or who will watch later wants to have a UXR conversation as well, that's my email. I am Noam Seg on the Twitter. I'd love to chat and keep questions coming. We're happy to answer questions later on as well on either LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, whatever you like to use. And if you subscribe to the channel, my channel, then you will get notifications for the next conversations. Tomorrow, I have another guest coming, Bezod from Slack. He is head of research and insight operations. And we'll be talking about democratizing research. So Henrik, you should join.
I will definitely join. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks again. Thanks everyone.
Hey, thank you so much.
Stay safe. And see you the next time. Bye for now.
Have a good one.